Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another real world coding scenario. We're still focusing on the integumentary system. Today, we have a patient that has a preoperative diagnosis of a right breast mass, which is also the postoperative diagnosis. Now, the one thing that you want to remember is that if at the time of coding, the pathology report is back, you'll want to code the pathological diagnoses because it's most definitive. All right, so keep in mind again, we are not coding for the anesthesiologist, so we don't have to worry about the anesthesia. Procedure performed was a right open breast biopsy. And if you're thinking CPT modifiers, RT would definitely be added to the code that we select. So here we have a patient that has a palpable right breast mass. Biopsy was done. It showed some atypical cells, and it was felt it could be cancerous. Patient also had a highly suspicious lesion on the ultrasound in the same area, so the recommendation was an open biopsy, which is why the patient is here today. The provider also states that the patient may need to have a simple mastectomy. The patient has previously had a lumpectomy, axillary dissection, and radiation. And they, of course, discussed all of this with the patient, and the patient agrees, consented, and she's, of course, here today. So, as usual, operative report starts off with patient was prepped and draped in a sterile fashion. The lesion was palpable at approximately 11 o'clock position, about 3 centimeters from the areolar border. You'll see in operative reports where there is a procedure like on the breast, they'll use an old school clock to illustrate where the lesion is. An incision was made that can be incorporated into a mastectomy incision. So they're planning for the future if they need to. This was carried down to the subacute tissue. A very thin skin flap was raised above the lesion. The lesion was about 1 to 1.5 size centimeters on palpation. They grasped it, they pulled it out, and then they took a small margin for biopsy. And then the specimen was labeled and sent to the lab. Frozen section returned showing atypical cells, but a definitive diagnosis of malignancy could not be made. The patient had previous radiation and there was lots of fibrosis. This made the procedure somewhat difficult, and the physician decided to close the incision and wait for permanent sections and a final result. Prior to closing, because the anterior margins were close to this abnormal area, repeat abnormal in anterior margins were taken. They closed up the wound, and all the sponge and instrument counts were correct. Pathology report later indicated benign fibrosis tumor. All right. So what happened was that they took out an entire mass, a lesion from the breast. It was excised. So of course, let's start with our CPT code. And now there's a couple of ways to get to this. I personally like to go to the body part, but keep in mind with CPT, you can look up procedure or service, condition, organ, anatomic site. Me personally, I try to um, go to a word that's going to be the easiest for me. So I'm going to start with breast, and you can actually, again, you can go to excision, but I'm going to go to breast, and under breast, I'm going to go to excision lesion, and the code ranges that I'm given: 19120, 19125, 19126, and then 19301. And then, of course, The next step is for me to locate all of those codes in the main portion of the manual to then make a final decision about what my code is going to be. All right, so there were several options that they gave us, and so let's start with 19120, excision of a cyst, fibroadenoma, or other benign malignant tumor. And this was open, male or female, one or more lesions. Then they also gave us excision of a breast lesion that was identified by a preoperative marker. Well, we definitely did not have that. And then some of the other codes that they gave us, 19301, that's actually for a mastectomy. And the other code that they gave me was for a mastectomy as well. So the correct code for this patient would be 19125 with a, oh, I'm sorry, 19120 with a modifier RT. All right, so I like to put my code down so I don't forget. Okay, so then the other thing that I want to capture, because remember, this is real world, and real world coding, you generally are not coding just the CPT only. And so I really want to make sure that you get a full understanding of what a coder is actually doing. So for my diagnoses, I am going to capture the pathology report diagnoses, which was a fibrosis tumor. Okay, so I happen to know what main term I need to go to for that. And so I'm going to go to fibrosclerosis. And I know you're saying, well, how did you know to go to that term? And it's just, something that you learn with experience. And coding is something that you have to do over and over and over again. You don't just learn it overnight. All right, so I'm looking at fibrosclerosis and subterm of breast, which is giving me N60.3. And so, of course, I'm going to verify that code. And I want you to just keep in the back of your mind, we're coding what happened and why. What happened and why. Okay, so N60.3 is fibrosclerosis of the breast, and we know it was on the right breast, and so we're going to capture N60.31. Now, there are actually some other diagnoses that I want to pick up. So let's go back to the report. So in the report, the patient previously had breast cancer, and let me just highlight for you where it's located. So the patient has had a previous lumpectomy, axillary dissection, and radiation. So I actually can pick up two additional diagnosis codes. So let's actually talk about and look at the same time. So my patient actually has a personal history of breast cancer. So in the alphabetical index, I'm going to go to history and then personal, because there's a history and then family. And I'm going to go to personal, and then under personal, malignant neoplasm. Under malignant neoplasm, I'm going to go to breast, which gives me Z85.3. Now, while I'm over here, I'm also going to pick up the second code, and then we'll review them both. So I'm also going to go to history personal, and this time I'm going to go to radiation therapy, which gives me Z92.3. Now, again, that was something that was stated in the record, and you're probably like, how would you know to pick that up? Coding is something that you learn by doing. It is not something that you actually learn overnight. So, give yourself time to develop those skills. But in order to develop those skills, you got to get into the use of your manual. You've got to get into your guidelines because that's what's going to make a big difference in your ability to actually capture the codes. All right. And I have the code, so let's take a look at it. So Z85.3, personal history of malignant neoplasm of the breast. All right, so then I'm going to go to my other code, which was Z92.3. And let's see, here we go. So Z92.3, personal history of radiation. All right, so final codes for this patient. Our first listed code, which supports our CPT N6031, a personal history of a malignant neoplasm of the breast, Z85.3, and then personal history of radiation therapy, Z92.3. Thank you for listening.